Hi, I'm Catherine. I thought family meant unconditional love, loyalty through thick and thin. Instead, on Christmas morning, my own son casually announced over breakfast that he and his siblings were planning to contest my late mother's will and steal my $2 million inheritance. No hesitation, no shame, just a cold calculation delivered between bites of pancakes. I had raised him. I had sacrificed my career for his future. I had been the one caring for my dying mother while he lived his carefree life 3 states away. And somehow, I was still the obstacle standing between him and what he believed he deserved. Hold up. I'm curious where you're listening from, and if this story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, what I have planned for tomorrow is going to blow you away. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing that the son I had poured my heart into for 32 years saw me as nothing more than a bank account with legs. And when I finally decided to protect what was rightfully mine, they tried to destroy me in ways I never thought possible. Before we dive deeper into this nightmare, what time are you watching this and where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear if you've ever faced betrayal from the people you trusted most. Because some betrayals don't just break your heart, they break you open and force you to rebuild yourself stronger. The snow was falling thick and heavy outside the windows of my Craftsman home in Millbrook Heights, Vermont that Christmas morning. The kind of picture-perfect winter wonderland that belonged on greeting cards, where everything looked peaceful and pure under a blanket of white. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon rolls and coffee, the fireplace crackling with the warmth of split oak logs I had stacked myself the week before. I should have known something was wrong the moment my son Dalton walked through the front door. At 32, he still had that swagger that made him think the world owed him everything. But there was something different in his eyes that morning. Something calculating and cold that I'd never seen directed at me before. His wife, Amber, followed behind him, her designer boots clicking against the hardwood floors, already checking her phone instead of greeting me with the usual half-hearted hug. Their twins, 8-year-old Lily and Lucas, burst past their parents like golden retrievers, all energy and excitement about presents under the tree. My daughter Natalie arrived 20 minutes later with her husband Greg, their teenage son Kyle trailing behind with earbuds permanently attached to his head. The house filled with the familiar chaos of family gathering, voices overlapping, coats being shed, the coffee pot working overtime. For a moment, surrounded by the chatter and the smell of the Christmas feast I'd been preparing since dawn, I let myself believe this would be one of those magical holiday memories, the kind where differences are set aside and love wins the day. How naive I was. We gathered around the dining room table I had inherited from my grandmother, the same table where my mother had hosted Christmas dinner for 43 years before the cancer took her voice, then her strength, then finally her life 6 months ago. The table was set with her good china, the pattern of delicate roses that she had collected piece by piece over decades of marriage to my father. The conversation started innocent enough. Kyle complaining about his history teacher, Amber detailing her latest yoga retreat, Greg discussing the snow tire situation on his Suburban. Normal family small talk that felt almost comfortable, almost like the old days before everything got complicated. I served the glazed ham I'd been basting since 5 in the morning, the scalloped potatoes that took 3 hours to perfect, the green bean casserole that had been my mother's specialty. Everyone filled their plates, the clinking of silverware and murmured compliments filling the warm air. Then Dalton set down his fork and looked directly at me with those steel gray eyes that used to remind me of his father. "Mom, we need to talk about Grandma's will." The words landed in the room like a stone thrown through glass. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Amber suddenly became very interested in cutting her ham into precise tiny pieces. Natalie's face went pale, and she glanced at her brother with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What about it?" I asked carefully, my hand tightening around my water glass. Dalton leaned back in his chair, adopting that casual tone he used when he was about to ask me for money. "Well, it's just that we've been thinking. $2 million is a lot to leave to one person, especially when there are grandchildren to consider." My heart started beating faster, but I kept my voice steady. "Your grandmother left her estate to me because I was the one who took care of her. I was the one who moved her into my guest room when she couldn't live alone anymore. I was the one who drove her to every doctor's appointment, every chemo session, every—" "We know, Mom," Natalie interrupted, her voice softer but no less determined. "Your grandmother's mind was sharp until the day she died. Dr. Harrison confirmed that in writing."
Dalton shrugged, as if we were discussing the weather. Lawyers can challenge that, especially with the right medical testimony. Amber's uncle is an estate attorney in Burlington. He says we have a strong case. The room fell silent, except for the soft crackling of the fire and the wind rattling the windows. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, the warmth had been sucked out of the air like someone had opened all the doors at once. "You're talking about contesting your grandmother's will?" I said slowly, making sure I understood correctly. "On Christmas morning? At the table where she served you Sunday dinners for 30 years? It's not personal, Mom." Amber finally spoke up, not bothering to look up from her plate. "It's just business. $2 million could change our kids' futures. College funds, down payments on homes, financial security." I looked around the table at these people I had loved unconditionally, had sacrificed for, had put before my own needs and dreams for decades. The silence stretched until Kyle, oblivious to the tension, asked if there was more pie. "There's always more pie," I said quietly, standing up on legs that felt suddenly unsteady. "But I think Christmas dinner is over." As I walked toward the kitchen, my hands shaking as I gripped the edge of the counter, I realized that something fundamental had just shifted. The family I thought I knew, the people I thought loved me, had just revealed themselves to be something else entirely. And in that moment, standing in my mother's kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a Christmas feast that suddenly tasted like ash, I made a decision that would change everything. They wanted to play games with my inheritance? Fine. But they were about to learn that the woman who had raised them, who had outmaneuvered hospital administrators and insurance companies for 30 years as a charge nurse, wasn't going down without a fight. The war for my mother's legacy had just begun, and they had no idea what they had just awakened. The silence that followed dinner was deafening. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the granite countertop my mother had saved 2 years to afford, watching the snow fall heavier outside the window. Behind me, I could hear muffled conversations from the dining room, voices that I once brought me comfort, now sounding like conspirators planning a heist. Dalton appeared in the doorway, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, wearing that expression he'd perfected as a teenager when he wanted something. "Mom, you're being dramatic. We're not trying to hurt you." I turned to face him. This man I had carried for 9 months, nursed through midnight fevers, cheered for at every baseball game and graduation ceremony. "Dramatic? You just told me you're planning to steal my inheritance, and I'm being dramatic?" "We're not stealing anything," he said, his voice taking on that patient tone people use with difficult children. "We're ensuring fair distribution. Grandma Ruth loved all of us, not just you." The audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. Where were you when she was throwing up blood from chemo? Where were you during the 3-hour drives to the cancer center in Burlington every Tuesday for 8 months? Where were you when she couldn't remember how to use the television remote and cried because she felt stupid? His jaw tightened. "I live in Denver, Mom. I have a job, a family. I couldn't just drop everything." "But you can drop everything to contest her will?" He didn't answer that. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed me a text thread. "Look, Natalie and I have been talking about this for months. Even before Grandma died. We all knew this day would come." I stared at the screen, scrolling through months of messages between my children. Messages planning how to challenge my mother's will. Messages discussing lawyer fees and timelines. Messages sent while I was literally spoon-feeding my mother's soup because her hands shook too badly to hold a spoon. "Months," I whispered. "You've been planning this for months?" "We've been realistic about the situation," Natalie said, appearing beside her brother. "Mom, $2 million could change our kids' lives. Lily and Lucas need college funds. Kyle wants to study engineering at MIT. The inheritance could make all of that possible." I looked at my daughter, remembering the nights I stayed up helping her with algebra homework, the 3 jobs I worked to pay for her nursing school, the down payment I gave her for her first house. And what about what I need? What about my future? Amber walked into the kitchen then, bouncing Lucas on her hip while Lily clung to her leg. Catherine, you're 58. You have a good job, a paid-off house. You'll be fine. But these kids deserve a chance at something better. The casual use of my first name instead of Mom felt like another small knife. I had been Mom to Amber for 8 years, ever since she married Dalton. I had been the one to hold her hand during her difficult pregnancy with the twins. I had been the one babysitting every weekend so she and Dalton could have date nights. I see. So, my 30 years of sacrifice, my lost promotions because I couldn't work overtime due to family obligations, my emptied savings accounts every time one of you had a crisis, that all means nothing compared to what you think you deserve? Greg spoke up from the doorway, his voice uncomfortable but determined. Catherine, it's not about what anyone deserves. It's about what makes the most sense financially.
I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Greg, who had borrowed $15,000 from me 3 years ago to keep his plumbing business afloat and had conveniently forgotten to pay it back? Greg, who was now lecturing me about financial sense. The memories came flooding back then, uninvited but crystal clear. Dalton's senior year of high school when he wrecked his car and I took out a second mortgage to buy him another one because he needed transportation to his job at the movie theater. Natalie's wedding, where I paid for half the reception because she wanted the venue of her dreams. The countless birthdays, Christmases, emergencies, where I was the one who showed up with my checkbook open. And through it all, my mother watching, worrying that I was giving too much. "Catherine, honey," she'd said just 6 months before her diagnosis, "you need to save something for yourself. These kids are grown. They need to stand on their own feet." But I hadn't listened. I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought being a good mother meant never saying no, never putting my needs first, never questioning whether my generosity was being taken for granted. Now I understood why my mother had left everything to me. It wasn't favoritism. It wasn't senility. It was her final gift. Her way of ensuring that the daughter who had given everything would finally have something that couldn't be taken away. Except now it was being taken away, and by the very people I had sacrificed everything for. "You know what the saddest part is?" I said, looking around at all of them gathered in my kitchen like vultures circling roadkill. "I would have shared it with you. If you had come to me with respect, with gratitude for everything your grandmother and I did for this family, I would have helped with college funds and down payments and whatever else you needed." Dalton's expression shifted slightly, uncertainty flickering across his features. You would have?" "Of course I would have, because that's what family does. But instead, you decided to steal it, to contest a will written by a woman who was sharper at 84 than most people are at 40. To hire lawyers and drag our family through court and probably blow a quarter of the inheritance on legal fees." The kitchen fell silent again. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending snow swirling in wild patterns across the yard. The Christmas tree lights blinked cheerfully in the living room, a mockery of the holiday spirit that had died somewhere between the ham and the threats. "It doesn't have to be like this," Natalie said finally, her voice softer now. "We could work something out. Maybe a percentage for each of us, something fair." "Fair," I repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. "What would be fair, Natalie? Should I calculate the years I spent changing your diapers, the college tuition I paid, the wedding reception, the down payment for your house, the emergency loan for Amber's medical bills, various birthday and Christmas gifts, conservatively $15,000 over the years?" Dalton's face had gone pale. "Mom, you can't be serious. That's $113,000 for Dalton alone. Should I do Natalie's tally too?" "Those were gifts," Natalie protested. "You can't take gifts back. And the inheritance was a gift. Too. From your grandmother. To me. But apparently gifts only count when they're going in your direction." The truth was settling over the room like the snow outside, thick and cold and undeniable. They had come here expecting me to roll over,
to accept their entitled demands, to apologize for receiving what my mother had wanted me to have. They had miscalculated badly. "I think," I said, closing the notebook and setting it on the counter, my hands steadier now as anger replaced shock, "that Christmas dinner is officially over. You know where the door is." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Greg cleared his throat and muttered something about getting on the road before the weather got worse. One by one, they filed out of my kitchen, gathering coats and purses and children, their earlier confidence replaced by something that looked almost like shame, but not quite shame enough. Dalton paused at the front door, his hand on the knob. "Mom, this doesn't have to end our relationship. We can get past this." I looked at him standing there in the coat I had bought him last Christmas, holding the grandson I had babysat every weekend for 2 years, and felt something inside me turn to stone. "You're right," I said quietly. "This doesn't have to end our relationship, but contesting my mother's will certainly will." He studied my face for a long moment, searching for the mother who had always bent to his will, who had always chosen peace over principles. That woman was gone, buried under the weight of too many sacrifices and too little gratitude.
"I hope you change your mind," he said finally. "I hope you do," I replied. After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the wreckage of Christmas morning. Torn wrapping papers scattered across the floor, half-empty coffee cups on the side tables, the lingering smell of ham and betrayal in the air. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed: Harold Brennan, estate attorney, my mother's lawyer and mine for the past 15 years. "Harold," I said when he answered on the third ring, "I hope you're having a better Christmas than I am. I need to see you first thing Monday morning. My children are planning to contest my mother's will, and I want to be ready for war." Monday morning arrived gray and bitter cold, the kind of January weather that made Millbrook Heights feel like the edge of the world. I sat in Harold Brennan's office at precisely 9 o'clock, a steaming cup of coffee warming my hands and a manila folder thick with documents resting on my lap. Harold had been my mother's attorney for 23 years, a man whose silver hair and kind eyes masked the sharp legal mind that had protected our family's interests through 2 decades of estate planning. "Catherine," he said, settling behind his mahogany desk with a gravity that told me he understood the seriousness of what we were facing. "I've reviewed Ruth's will 3 times since you called. It's ironclad. Your mother was of completely sound mind when she signed it, and I have the medical documentation to prove it." I opened my folder and spread the contents across his desk. Bank statements showing years of transfers to my children, receipts for college tuitions, car payments, wedding expenses, emergency loans that were never repaid. A detailed timeline I had spent all Sunday night creating, documenting every major financial sacrifice I had made for my family over the past 30 years. "I need you to understand what we're dealing with," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "This isn't just about money. This is about 2 people who have taken my generosity for granted their entire adult lives, and who now feel entitled to steal what my mother specifically wanted me to have." Harold studied the documents, his expression growing more serious with each page. "Jesus, Catherine, you've given them nearly $200,000 over the years." $217,000 to be exact, not including gifts, vacations I paid for, or the countless smaller expenses I covered without thinking twice. I pulled out another sheet of paper. "And that's just what I could document. There's probably another $50,000 in cash gifts and emergency help that I never bothered to record. And they're claiming Ruth wasn't competent when she made her will? Dalton says they have medical testimony lined up. Amber's uncle apparently specializes in will contests." I leaned forward, meeting Harold's eyes. "I need to know how to protect what's mine. My mother didn't work 2 jobs for 40 years and save every penny just so my ungrateful children could fund their lifestyles with her legacy." Harold was quiet for a long moment, tapping his gold pen against the leather desk pad. There are several ways we can approach this. We can file a motion to dismiss their challenge based on the medical evidence of Ruth's competency. We can present character witnesses who interacted with her regularly in her final months. Dr. Harrison's records show she was mentally sharp right up until the end. What else? His smile was small, but sharp. We can also present evidence of your children's character, or lack thereof. He gestured to the papers spread between us. This pattern of financial dependence, the timing of their challenge, the fact that they made no effort to care for their grandmother during her illness, it all paints a picture of opportunistic greed rather than genuine concern for Ruth's mental state. I felt something cold and determined settle in my chest. I want to do more than just defend. I want to go on the offensive. Harold raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? I pulled out my phone and showed him the text thread Dalton had displayed so proudly on Christmas Day. They've been planning this for months. While I was caring for my dying mother, they were conspiring to steal her money. I want that presented as evidence of premeditation. That's excellent. What else? I want a forensic accountant to calculate exactly how much I've given them over the years. I want character witnesses who can testify to my mother's mental state. I want medical experts who can counter whatever quack they dig up to claim she was incompetent. My voice was getting stronger, more confident. And I want to file a countersuit for harassment and emotional distress. Harold's pen moved quickly across his legal pad. Catherine, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go this route? Legal battles with family members can get very ugly. Things might be said that can't be taken back. I thought about Christmas morning, about the casual cruelty in Dalton's voice as he announced their intention to steal from me, about Amber using my first name instead of calling me Mom, about Natalie sitting silently while her brother threatened everything my mother had worked for. They fired the first shot, I said quietly. I'm just finishing the war they started. Over the next 3 days, I became a woman possessed. I spent hours in my mother's old bedroom, which I had left untouched since her death, going through boxes of financial records, medical files, and correspondence. Every document was a weapon in the arsenal I was building.
I found letters my mother had written to Harold, updating her will multiple times over the years. In each revision, her reasoning was clear. Catherine had sacrificed her own future to care for family. The inheritance was her reward for a lifetime of selfless service. There were specific mentions of Dalton and Natalie's financial irresponsibility, their failure to visit or call regularly, their expectation that their mother would always be their safety net. The most damning document was a letter my mother had written but never sent, found tucked inside her jewelry box. It was addressed to Dalton and dated 6 months before her death, after a particularly disappointing phone call where he had asked for money to cover his mortgage payment. My dear grandson, it began, I am tired of watching your mother pour her life into ungrateful children who see her only as a bank account. Catherine gave up promotions to care for you when you were sick. She emptied her retirement savings to pay for your education. She mortgaged her future for your present, and you have never once thanked her properly? When I am gone, I pray she will finally learn to put herself first. The inheritance I am leaving her is my final gift to the daughter who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. I sat on my mother's bed, holding that letter with shaking hands, feeling the weight of her love and her worry for me. She had seen what I was too blind to see, that my children had learned to take without giving, to demand without gratitude, to expect rescue without consequences. Thursday afternoon, Harold called with an update that made my blood sing with satisfaction. Their attorney filed the initial challenge today. It's exactly what we expected, claiming diminished capacity due to medication and pain. But Catherine, you're going to love this. They made a critical error. What kind of error?
They filed for immediate access to the estate accounts pending the outcome of the case. They want the court to freeze your inheritance and redistribute it equally among all parties. It shows their hand completely. This isn't about honoring Ruth's wishes or protecting a vulnerable elderly woman. It's about money, pure and simple. I closed my eyes, feeling a grim sort of vindication. How do we use that? We file our countermotion tomorrow. I've prepared a brief that presents your evidence chronologically. The pattern of financial dependence, their abandonment of Ruth during her illness, the premeditated planning of this challenge. And, Catherine, I've also included a request for sanctions against their attorney for filing a frivolous lawsuit. Sanctions? If we can prove they had no good faith basis for claiming incompetency, the court can order them to pay your legal fees. It's a long shot, but with the evidence we have, it's worth pursuing. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since my mother's funeral. I opened a bottle of wine, her favorite Bordeaux that she had been saving for a special occasion that never came. I poured myself a glass and sat in her favorite chair by the living room window, watching the snow fall in the lamplight outside. For the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten: peace. Not the exhausted numbness that had carried me through my mother's illness and death, but genuine tranquility. I was finally fighting back. I was finally protecting what mattered. I was finally choosing myself over their endless demands. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. "Mom, can we talk? This doesn't have to get so ugly." I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. They had made their choice on Christmas morning. Now they would live with the consequences. The next morning, Harold and I walked into the courthouse together, my high heels clicking confidently against the marble floors. I wore my best navy suit, the one I had bought for job interviews before my mother got sick, the one that made me feel powerful and professional and absolutely certain of my worth. In the elevator, Harold handed me a thick document folder. "Our countersuit," he said simply. 137 pages of evidence, character witnesses, medical records, and financial documentation. If they want to play hardball, they're about to learn they picked the wrong opponent. As the elevator doors opened onto the third floor, I squared my shoulders and lifted my chin. Somewhere in this building, my children were meeting with their attorney, probably still convinced that their mother would fold under pressure, that I would choose family harmony over principles, that love meant never holding them accountable for their choices. They're about to discover how wrong they were. The daughter they had taken for granted for 32 years was gone. In her place stood a woman who had finally learned the difference between love and exploitation, between family and users, between generosity and stupidity. The war they started on Christmas morning was about to begin in earnest, and I intended to win. The first shot across the bow came faster than I expected. 3 days after Harold filed our countermotion, I was at work at Millbrook General Hospital, checking on my patients during the afternoon shift, when my phone started buzzing incessantly. Text after text, call after call, all from numbers I didn't recognize. By the dinner break, I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My hands shook slightly as I scrolled through them, reading message after message from distant relatives, family friends, even neighbors I barely spoke to.
Catherine, I can't believe what Dalton is saying about you on Facebook. This is terrible. That was from my cousin Jennifer in Portland, someone I hadn't heard from in 2 years. Saw the post. You need to see this. Call me. From my mother's old bridge partner, Eleanor. The next message included a screenshot that made my blood turn to ice. There it was, posted on Dalton's Facebook page for all the world to see. A lengthy post with my mother's obituary photo attached, painting me as a manipulative daughter who had isolated a vulnerable elderly woman and stolen her inheritance through coercion and elder abuse. My grandmother, Ruth Henley, was a loving woman who wanted nothing more than to see her family taken care of, the post read. Unfortunately, in her final months, she was isolated from her grandchildren and manipulated into changing her will to benefit only one person. We are fighting to honor her true wishes and ensure her legacy goes to the grandchildren she loved so much.
Please keep our family in your thoughts as we seek justice for Grandma Ruth. The post had been shared 47 times. The comment section was a nightmare of people I barely knew offering sympathy to my son while painting me as a predatory daughter. Neighbors, acquaintances, even some of my mother's former coworkers had chimed in with messages of support for Dalton and condemnation for me. "I always wondered about that daughter of hers," wrote Mrs. Pemberton from 3 houses down. "Never seemed right the way she kept Ruth isolated those last months." My vision blurred with rage. Isolated? I had driven my mother to every social event her health allowed. I had invited people over constantly, encouraged phone calls, facilitated video chats with distant relatives. The only isolation had been from Dalton and Natalie, who couldn't be bothered to visit more than twice during her entire illness. I called Harold immediately. "Did you see it?" "I saw it," he said grimly. "And Catherine, I have good news and bad news. The bad news is this kind of social media campaign can influence potential jurors if this goes to trial. The good news is he just handed us a gift." "How is public humiliation a gift?" "Because he's making specific factual claims that we can disprove. Elder abuse, isolation, coercion, changing the will under duress. We have medical records, witness statements, and documentation proving all of that is false. He's not just telling a story anymore. He's committing libel." That evening, I sat in my living room with my laptop open, methodically screenshotting every comment, every share, every piece of the narrative my son was spinning about me. Each screenshot felt like swallowing glass, but I documented everything. Harold had taught me that in legal battles, evidence was everything. The next morning brought a surprise that shifted the entire landscape. Dr. Harrison, my mother's oncologist, called me personally. "Catherine, I need you to know that I've been contacted by an attorney representing your children. They're asking me to testify that your mother's mental capacity was compromised by her pain medication in her final months." My heart stopped. And I told them to go to hell." His voice was sharp with indignation. "Ruth Henley was one of the sharpest patients I've ever treated. Even in her final weeks, she was asking detailed questions about her treatment options, making complex decisions about her care, discussing financial planning with remarkable clarity. The idea that she was mentally compromised is not just wrong, it's insulting. Would you be willing to testify to that?" "Catherine, I'll do more than testify. I'm writing a formal letter documenting every interaction I had with your mother regarding her mental acuity, and I'm sending copies to the medical board because any doctor who would claim otherwise based on the records we have is committing malpractice." The tide was beginning to turn, but the real tsunami came from an unexpected source. That afternoon, my phone rang with a call from Sarah Westbrook, a woman I barely knew who worked at the bank where my mother had done business for 30 years. "Mrs. Hammond, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I saw that awful post your son made and I couldn't stay quiet anymore." "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "I was your mother's personal banker for the last 5 years. I helped her with her estate planning. And I need you to know that woman was sharp as a tack right up to the end. She came in just 2 months before she passed wanting to add a codicil to her will, making absolutely certain you would inherit everything." My breath caught. "A codicil?" "She was worried about your children challenging the will. She specifically mentioned that they had never helped with her care, but kept asking about her finances. She wanted ironclad protection for you." Sarah's voice was getting stronger, more determined. "Mrs. Hammond, I have security footage of that meeting. Your mother was completely lucid, asking detailed questions, understanding every implication of what she was signing. If they want to claim she was incompetent, they're going to have to explain away video evidence." I was quiet for so long that Sarah asked if I was still there. "I'm here. I can't believe she did that." "She loved you very much, and she was furious about how your children treated you. She told me once that she'd rather leave her money to charity than let them get their hands on it after the way they'd exploited your generosity."
That evening, Harold's office became a war room. We spread documents across his conference table like generals planning a campaign. The security footage from the bank, Dr. Harrison's letter, Statements from my mother's neighbors who had witnessed her sharp wit and clear thinking during their regular conversations. Character references from the hospital staff who had seen me caring for her during her appointments. "Catherine," Harold said, leaning back in his chair with something approaching amazement, "I've been practicing law for 32 years, and I've never seen a will contest case where the challengers so thoroughly destroyed their own credibility." "What do you mean?" "Your son's Facebook post isn't just damaging to your reputation, it's legally actionable. He's made specific claims about elder abuse and manipulation that we can prove are false. The bank footage alone demolishes their entire argument about your mother's mental state." He pulled out another document. "And this morning, I received something very interesting. A letter from Patricia Morgan, the social worker who visited your mother monthly during her illness." I remembered Patricia, a kind woman in her 50s who had helped coordinate my mother's care through the state's Elder Services program. "What did she say?" Harold smiled. "She documented every visit meticulously. According to her records, your mother was not only mentally competent, she was actively concerned about your well-being. She told Patricia multiple times that she worried you were giving too much of yourself to ungrateful children who would never appreciate your sacrifices." The irony was staggering. While I had been questioning whether I was being too harsh, too unforgiving, my mother had been worried that I wasn't being harsh enough. "There's more," Harold continued. "Patricia is willing to testify that your mother specifically discussed her will during their final meeting. She wanted to ensure that the daughter who had sacrificed everything would finally be taken care of." Over the next week, the evidence mounted like an avalanche. My mother's hairdresser came forward with stories of their conversations during weekly appointments, where Ruth had expressed frustration with Dalton and Natalie's sense of entitlement. The physical therapist who had worked with her submitted a statement describing her mental acuity and her clear explanations of why she was leaving everything to me. Most damaging of all was testimony from Eleanor, my mother's bridge partner, who revealed that Dalton had called Ruth just 3 weeks before her death, asking for a loan to cover his mortgage payment. When Ruth had gently suggested he speak to his mother instead, he had hung up on her. She had died without hearing from him again. The Facebook post that was supposed to destroy my reputation had instead triggered an avalanche of support from people who had actually known my mother, who had witnessed her final months, who understood the depth of my dedication and the shallowness of my children's concern. Harold called on Friday afternoon with news that made my hands shake with vindication. Their attorney wants to meet. Apparently, the evidence we've presented has made them reconsider their position. What kind of meeting? Settlement discussion. Catherine, I think they're realizing they're about to lose badly, and they want to minimize the damage. I thought about my mother's letter, hidden in her jewelry box, expressing her hope that I would finally learn to put myself first. I thought about the years of sacrifices, the emptied savings accounts, the missed opportunities, all given freely to children who now wanted to steal her final gift to me. "Harold," I said quietly, "I don't want to settle." "Are you sure? Litigation is expensive and emotionally draining." "I'm sure. They wanted a war, and they're going to get one. But more than that, they need to face the consequences of their choices. My mother left me that inheritance for a reason, and I'm not going to let them intimidate me into giving up what she wanted me to have." "In that case," Harold said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice, "we proceed to trial. And Catherine, based on what we have, I think your children are about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between entitlement and inheritance." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. The community that mattered, the people who had actually known my mother and witnessed our relationship, had spoken. Their voices drowned out the social media noise and the manufactured sympathy for my ungrateful children.
The truth was finally emerging, and it was more powerful than any lie they could tell. The trial lasted 3 days, but the outcome was decided within the first hour. I sat in the gallery behind Harold, watching as Dalton and Natalie's attorney struggled to present a case that crumbled with each piece of evidence we introduced. The bank security footage was devastating. Watching my mother, alert and determined, explaining to Sarah Westbrook exactly why she wanted to protect my inheritance was like hearing her voice one last time, defending me from beyond the grave. When Dr. Harrison took the stand, his testimony was clinical and unambiguous. Ruth Henley possessed complete mental clarity throughout her treatment. Her cognitive function was never compromised by medication or illness. Any suggestion otherwise is medically inaccurate and professionally irresponsible.
Doctor, are you suggesting that every cancer patient receiving pain management is mentally incompetent to make legal decisions? Not exactly, Your Honor, but because that's what your testimony implies, that pain medication automatically renders patients unable to understand the consequences of their actions. The doctor fumbled through an explanation that satisfied no one. When Harold cross-examined him, it became clear that he had been paid $5,000 for his opinion and had spent less than an hour reviewing my mother's case. On the final day, Harold called me to testify. I had dreaded this moment for weeks, but as I sat in the witness box, looking out at a courtroom filled with my mother's friends, neighbors, and former colleagues, I felt a strength I didn't know I possessed. Mrs. Hammond, Harold said gently, can you tell the court about your relationship with your mother during her final year? I spoke for 20 minutes about the daily phone calls, the medical appointments, the grocery shopping, the nights I slept on her couch when she was too afraid to be alone. I described the conversations we had about her will, her clear explanations of why she was leaving everything to me, her concerns about my children's sense of entitlement. When Dalton and Natalie's attorney cross-examined me, he tried to paint me as manipulative, suggesting I had isolated my mother from her grandchildren. But Harold had prepared me well. Sir, I said calmly, my mother had a phone in every room in her house. She had my children's numbers programmed into speed dial. If they chose not to call or visit, that was their decision, not my manipulation. But surely you influenced her decision to leave you the entire inheritance. The only influence I had was 30 years of showing up when my family needed me. If that's manipulation, then I'm guilty as charged. The judge's verdict was swift and unequivocal. Not only did she dismiss my children's challenge, she awarded me attorney's fees and damages for the emotional distress caused by their frivolous lawsuit. But more than that, her words from the bench felt like a vindication that reached far beyond the legal victory. This court finds no evidence of diminished capacity, undue influence, or elder abuse. What the evidence does show is a daughter who sacrificed her own interests to care for an aging mother, and adult children who felt entitled to an inheritance they had done nothing to earn. The decedent's will clearly reflects her values and her gratitude for the care she received. This challenge was without merit and appears to have been motivated entirely for greed. As we walked out of the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight I had carried for so long, the constant worry about whether I was being too selfish, too unforgiving, had finally lifted. My mother's wishes had been protected. Her legacy was secure. Harold shook my hand on the courthouse steps. Catherine, in 32 years of practice, I've never seen a will contest fail so completely. Your children picked the wrong fight with the wrong woman. 6 months later, I stood in my new home, a charming Victorian cottage on Maple Street with a wraparound porch and a garden that would have made my mother proud. The inheritance had allowed me to buy the house outright, to finally have something that was completely mine, something that couldn't be taken away or borrowed against or sacrificed for someone else's needs. The irony wasn't lost on me. My children's greed had ultimately freed me from their constant demands. The legal battle had severed the last threads of obligation that had bound me to their endless needs. For the first time in my adult life, I was living for myself.
I had also done something my mother would have loved. I established the Ruth Henley Memorial Scholarship at the community college, funding nursing education for single mothers who were struggling to build better lives for their families. The scholarship would ensure that my mother's legacy lived on in the very values she had tried to instill in her grandchildren: hard work, sacrifice for others, and genuine gratitude. The silence from Dalton and Natalie was complete. No phone calls, no texts, no attempts at reconciliation. Part of me had hoped that losing the legal battle might humble them, might make them reflect on their choices and reach out with genuine apologies. But their silence spoke louder than any words could have. They weren't sorry for what they had done. They were only sorry they had lost. On a crisp autumn morning, almost a year after that devastating Christmas dinner, I was working in my garden when a car pulled into my driveway. My heart skipped, wondering if one of my children had finally come to make amends. Instead, a young woman got out, someone I didn't recognize but who looked vaguely familiar. "Mrs. Hammond? I'm Jessica, Dalton's first marriage." I had met Jessica only a handful of times over the years. She was in her early 20s now, a college student who had grown up mostly with her mother in another state. I wiped my hands on my gardening gloves, unsure what to expect. "It hopes it's okay that I came by," she said nervously. "I wanted to thank you for the scholarship. I'm starting nursing school next semester, and the Ruth Henley Memorial Scholarship is making it possible." My breath caught. I had no idea she had even applied, less than she was one of the recipients. "I also wanted you to know," she continued, "I understand what happened with the will. My dad, he's always been like that, taking things that aren't his, expecting handouts, never appreciating what people do for him. I'm sorry he treated you that way."
We sat on my porch swing, and Jessica told me about her life, her dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse, her gratitude for having a great-grandmother who valued education and hard work. She had never expected anything from Ruth's estate, had never felt entitled to money she hadn't earned. "You know what the best part is?" she said as she prepared to leave. "Great-Grandma Ruth would have loved knowing that her money is helping someone become a nurse, just like you. It's exactly what she would have wanted." After Jessica left, I sat on my porch as the sun set over Millbrook Heights, feeling a peace so profound it brought tears to my eyes. My mother's money hadn't just secured my future, it was creating opportunities for young people who shared her values. The inheritance had become exactly what she would have wanted, a force for good in the world. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since the day my mother died. I opened the jewelry box where I kept her engagement ring, the one my father had given her 63 years ago. Nestled beside it was the letter she had written but never sent, the one expressing her hope that I would finally learn to put myself first. I read it again, her words flowing over me like a benediction. "When I am gone, I pray she will finally learn to put herself first. The inheritance I am leaving her is my final gift to the daughter who gave everything and asked for nothing in return." For the first time, I truly understood what she had given me. Not just money, but permission. Permission to value myself, permission to set boundaries, permission to say no to people who would take advantage of my generosity, permission to build a life based on my own dreams rather than other people's needs. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the jewelry box. Tomorrow I would call the scholarship committee and see about increasing the endowment. There were more young people like Jessica out there, people who understood the value of hard work and genuine gratitude. The inheritance they had tried to steal ultimately gave me something far more valuable than money. It had given me the freedom to finally choose myself. And for the first time in my life, that choice felt not selfish, but sacred. If you've ever been in a situation where the people you love most tried to take advantage of your kindness, remember this: setting boundaries isn't betrayal. Protecting what's yours isn't greed. And choosing yourself over people who would exploit your generosity isn't selfishness. It's survival. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time when you had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your peace. Because sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who see your love as weakness. Stay strong,
Set boundaries, and remember, you don't owe anyone your happiness, not even family.